All right, welcome to Mind Controllers, a podcast about shining the light on the psychological aspects behind some of our favorite video games. I'm your host, Brandon Craw. Today, I'm joined by my Metaphor co-host,
Joe Moreno.
And today we're talking about doing a deep dive into Metaphor Refantazio, which is like the third episode we have done on this game.
You can say we really like this game a lot.
Yeah, maybe just a little bit. I don't know. So yeah, sit back, relax. Let us tell you all about the interesting stuff we found within Metaphor. And for whoever's listening right now, thank you so much for listening. You know, if you're not already subscribed to the podcast, you haven't already rated and reviewed on there, please go ahead and do so whenever you can. It really helps us out. So thank you for that. Now, I feel like normally we'll talk about our experience with the game first, but for anyone who might not have played the game yet, I'm going to go ahead and give you all a description about what this game's about. Metaphor Refantazio is a JRPG created by Atlas and Sega and Studio Zero, set in a fantasy world called Uchronia. You play as Will, the best friend of the prince and heir to the throne, who has mysteriously succumbed to an illness after an assassination attempt. Maybe that illness isn't too mysterious. Due to the sudden death of now the king of Uchronia, because he was murdered by our antagonist, Luis, you must now run in Uchronia's first ever democratic election. Now, this world is filled with a bunch of classist and racist undertones, and sometimes not even undertones. They're very blatant. And you, as an Elden, are the subject to a lot of the abuse endured by these isms. So, you must band together people from various races, win the favor of the people, and strive to take down Luis in order to bring your best friend back to life and maybe take the throne. Now, what does gameplay feel like? It is a turn-based RPG. There's a lot of like narrative and engaging turn-based combat mechanics, which can actually be avoided by this interesting kind of action overworld mechanic that involves hitting the monster if you're high enough level and instantly killing it essentially, and then getting to avoid the fight. You also have relationships with a lot of your companions, and there are cutscenes and a lot of dialogue that delve deeper into the companions, and you get to understand them more, you grow closer to them, and honestly, you as a player grow to love them.
It also improves your skills as well.
Yes. And you also unlock a bunch of like in-game abilities that improve your skills in combat, in addition to improving some overworld stuff. So this game has a lot of mechanics going. If you've ever played a Persona game, if you've ever played like a JRPG, then you're kind of like halfway there. But I feel like this game does a lot of the things we just talked about, but in a very brilliant and intelligent manner that I haven't really seen in another game.
Right. I really enjoy that it's so interconnected, right? One thing you do in one section of the game can impact your skills, how strong you are, something else down the line in the story, your interactions with the party members. So it's all interconnected, and I really do appreciate that with Metaphor. I mean, Persona's like that, but I feel like with Metaphor, again, it just felt like you were always progressing, right? Especially once you got through like maybe the first 10 hours, because 10 hours is like tutorial. Especially with Atlas games, you'll learn that they love their tutorials and slow story starts in the beginning. But if you push through, there's a lot that this game offers.
Absolutely. I know. Yeah, it was funny because it felt like kind of grueling the first 10 hours because like there's a bit of grind. I guess now we're just talking about our experience with the game.
Let's get to it.
Yeah. So you're kind of grinding like quite a bit, I think, for the first 10 hours in order to stay alive really and like not waste a day, because this game has a day and night cycle. More than day and night. There's like it's like morning, afternoon, and evening, right? And sometimes night, but you typically want to make sure you have like an efficient plan, and you want to beat like a dungeon all in one day so that you don't quote unquote waste the day. So because of that, you feel compelled to beat a whole dungeon, because if you leave the dungeon, you then like
your day's gone.
Then you have to go and sleep and then come back to the dungeon. So there are ways to replenish your health, your MP while in the dungeon, but those ways are pretty slow at the beginning. So because of that, it feels like a bit slower of a game. It really picks up after that 10th hour, and even by then you get a good sense of a lot of the characters' personality, a lot of your companions' personality. And and I think that engagement with each character is really what drove me forward, because it felt like no line was wasted in this game. You know, like, I felt like every piece of dialogue there was like meant to propel the game forward and then either tell you about the world or tell you about that character's experience within that world and kind of paint the picture of this world that you're playing in, that they've been living in. And I think it does a great job at that. You really feel like this world is alive and exists somewhere.
Right.
Or at least I felt like it.
No, I think Atlas is really good at world building, right? How the world functions, what's going on in the world. And you see that a lot in this game. No matter where you travel to, any town, any cave, right? There's a story to it. There's a history to it, right?
Yeah.
That the characters, even the NPCs will talk about within that area. So yeah, I would believe, like, you know, I agree with you there that nothing is really wasted in this game.
Yeah, totally. Even though it's like a 70-hour JRPG, it does feel like finely tuned and perfectly crafted. I think there are some pacing issues towards the end of the game, for sure. But like, even that didn't really detract from my experience because it felt like the narrative bits that were hitting later on in the game hit so hard for me that I absolutely loved it. But I feel like we're kind of beating around the bush. So I also want to put a little spoiler warning, fictional character warning here. So, you know, we're already talking about Metaphor Refantazio. Anything related to the game and its associated characters are free game to be spoiled right now, which will probably happen during this discussion. And like all of our discussions, every character we talk about, even if there might be a resemblance, everything's fictional. So there's no intentional resemblance between any real person or thing. And we're also not licensed therapists yet. I'm not.
It'll take me a little bit longer, but we're getting there. I'm getting there. Yeah.
Joe is currently an associate therapist. There's no authority to anything we're really talking about here. So just want to put that caveat at the beginning. But with that being said, I was so motivated by this video game because it's one of my favorite games of all time that I wanted to make like a YouTube video about it and discuss it. And I think what I'm going to do here for our discussion is kind of like, I don't want to recite word for word what I put in that video, but I want to still talk about a lot of the same topics and then maybe expand upon a bit of them. And yeah, I initially wanted that YouTube video to be out to coincide with this, but I don't know if that'll happen. So it'll be some time, but it's all good. So I guess before I get started, did you have anything else you wanted to say about Metaphor? I guess other than your discussion at the end?
No, I don't think so, because we talked a lot about this in the spoiler cast.
Yeah.
Right. I still feel like this is one of my favorite video games of all time. I agree with you there. I do want to do like a new game plus. I'm starting to get that itch, but we got so many games coming out that it's just not going to be possible.
Yeah. So I'll just go ahead and dive right into it. And in addition to a lot of the stuff and praise I've already saying for Metaphor, this game kind of nailed the world building and the psychology that drives this main plot and once again makes the world feel alive. I think the game plays a lot with anxiety and with this classism and racism to create anxiety and touches on it in a pretty prevalent way. You see so many characters process trauma in a healthy way. It's almost like they're having therapy sessions with you whenever you have like a dialogue cutscene, narrative cutscene with them.
Sure.
And it was refreshing to see this game handle like mental health and a lot of these traumatic things with such care and delicacy and really paying attention to the details of capturing that character that might be grieving, but then not making them either too over the top or brushing it off like a silent protagonist who doesn't care about something.
For sure.
Everyone had an emotional reaction, but it was still prevalent and it wasn't over exaggerated and it felt real. And I think that's what this game really shines on, is making their characters feel real.
Whose Bond comes to mind that you're thinking about?
Heisme.
Okay.
Heisme's Bond is the first one that comes to mind because he is one of these characters who loses his son before the events of the video game, but we see him now dealing with it because he was always on the run, essentially, and never really got to grieve the loss of his son and never got to bury his son, or at least honor his death in a way that he wanted to. So I see him working through a lot of that stuff with Will.
Sure.
Will being the name of the main character that you play as. You can name him whatever you want, but his like canonical name is Will. So
the manga confirmed it.
Yeah, that's true. I still haven't finished it yet.
Still only one chapter. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm not behind. So along the lines of showing like a lot of care and detail to this game, like they build the world in a brilliant way. So the world of Uchronia is just like an island continent, and it's isolated from many other countries. I think they describe it because of the fast flowing waters. It's like hard to sail to other countries. So you feel pretty isolated. And I think that's important because they show you a map. It shows like a lot of other surrounding land mass, and you don't ever explore it. You just explore the Uchronia, which is still a pretty large continent. And one interesting thing I found was the name Uchronia. It's apparently a newish word.
Okay.
That it's like an actual word that is mostly used in like speculative fiction to describe somewhat of an alternate history.
That makes sense.
And I was like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, spoilers, right? But,
right.
This was the old world before.
Exactly. So, I mean, in this game, I feel like they use Uchronia. They say that this period of Uchronia, of this country that we see, is like a time of perfect social, technological, and ecological harmony, which to some might sound like a utopia, which is another major theme in this game, of like finding this perfect society where everyone's equal and there is no like conflict, and no one's like has to endure slave labor, and no one's like profiting off of that. And yeah. So of course, this isn't the case as we see in the game. Like, this is not a utopian society, and they want to make it a utopian society, but even in some of the examples, it's just impossible.
Yeah.
So a utopia cannot exist here in Uchronia. So once again, within Uchronia, we have all these different cities, towns, and villages. We explore them through our travels, but the main city we keep on coming back to is the royal capital, Grand Trad. That's essentially like the American equivalent of Washington, D.C. It's just like the home to the royal palace. The ruler of Uchronia lives there, the king. And this is interesting because this capital city is meant to encompass and represent all races found within Uchronia, all tribes. But I mean, we see that that's not necessarily the case. There are some tribes, some races that are just left out and cast aside due to just being that race. And that's where we see the racism come in. We also see a state religion in the game called Sanctism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see how their religion holds weight in the power dynamics of the city. And if you think of utopia, you kind of think of some concepts that, I mean, like America is trying to emulate with the separation of state and church. But here they say that they have that separation, but you see this one character in particular named Sanctifax Forden is like kind of controlling everything in the world. And
he's essentially the king.
Yeah, exactly. Some of the tribes that are found, well, I could go ahead and I'll read them off real quick. We have the Clamar, the Rusaint, a Ujif, Nydia, Parapis, Ishkia, Rogue, Mastari, and lastly the Elda, which are the main character that you play as. And within your group within this game, all of your companions, there's one representative of each race I found, which was like, that's kind of cool. Like I said earlier, like you are the subject of a lot of abuse and racism and classism because you are an Elden. And the Eldens are frowned upon in the society because you're like this tainted race. You're branded as this tainted race because you have like the closest ties to the oldest race of people.
And at this point, I don't even think most of the society knows that why we're racist to the Eldens, right? It's just accepted to the point where it's like, wait, why did this begin in the first place? And you don't even learn that until like, what, maybe more than 2/3 of the game?
Totally.
Right? Their origins and why they were persecuted.
Yeah, and the origins were like very interesting as well, where you later find out that every other race in the world only exists because of like this certain thing that I will describe in a second. And they all kind of like rapidly evolved to become these different creatures, but they all stem from Eldens. Everyone was an Elden. And the Eldens also, for the sake of this conversation, just look like regular humans, like you and me, you know, like.
And they're the most persecuted.
Yeah. They don't have any horns. They don't have any wings. They don't look like cute little dolls for some reason.
Yeah.
They're just plain looking humans, no other extra feature, but they're the most persecuted, as Joe just said. So you're always seeing like these kind of snide remarks from the people in the area, in the town. They'll say stuff like, you're only running to be a king because you couldn't get attention anywhere else, or something like that, because you're an Elden. And the Eldens, they endured a lot of abuse. They were even, their hometown was burned alive from Sanctifax Forden, who was the current leader of the church and the Sanctus. And the Eldens are also capable of using Magla. And Magla is like the source of magic in this world. And like it exists because it is a like physical manifestation of anxiety and fear that's been released from people's hearts. So Eldens are the only one who can naturally harness this Magla and cast the magic without these special tools. We later learn that that's not necessarily the case. Like, people could still do it, but everyone, because they believe the Eldens are the only ones who could cast magic, they persecute the Eldens for being, not wizards, but, being able to cast spells and stuff.
They have stronger magic, like the archetypes, right?
Yeah.
They're afraid of that. No one understands what that is, because the Mustari can use magic,
oh, right. They could see the Magla.
Yeah, they can see the Magla.
Third eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, that allows them to see like the flow of Magla, or like the color of Magla around certain characters, around certain areas and stuff. So magic's accepted in this world. And you have what were the tools called? Igniters, thank you. I was like, I know it's not archetype. Yeah, and then you had the Igniters, which would give the quote-unquote non-Eldens the ability to cast magic. But Eldens are the only ones who don't need it. Eldens are persecuted. And it is also later revealed, like we already said, that in the ancient times of this world, which kind of look like our modern, like their ancient time is like our modern world, is when humanity discovered Magla. And this kind of caused a bunch of wars to play out, effectively destroying humanity and sending it back to this more medieval era that we see now in the game, and kind of implies how humanity fought and destroyed themselves over fear and anxiety. There was just so much fear and anxiety amongst all of them that they were able to harness it and use that to kill each other. And the Ukrainians who ended up living through these wars were exposed to so much Magla that they rapidly mutated, and that's the 9 different races that we described. So the Eldens were the only ones who didn't mutate because they were hiding out in the corner of the world, I believe, during the main war, the big wars. So they weren't exposed to all this Magla. And kind of why Sanctifax Forden sought them out and wanted to kill them, like just to get rid of them at the end. So pretty much this world has a lot of anxiety. Anxiety is a huge talking point throughout the game. And I mean, like, the Magla is powered by it. You have anxiety created from the racism, from the classism, from your king being murdered, and then all of a sudden you have this democracy forced upon you because the king cast a spell that caused like an election to occur. But yeah, one thing that is prevalent is Luis's knowledge. Now, Luis is this young-ish war general who was influenced by the novel Utopia, called Utopia, that's in the game, that the main protagonist, carry with, but so does Luis. Luis was influenced by the Utopia, and he wants to create this Utopia. Amongst other things, one of the first main things we see in the game is this, like, his idea of Utopia is to not have a monarchy, to not have a king.
It's a meritocracy.
Yeah.
It's survival of the fittest. Whoever's strong can survive is allowed to rule.
Absolutely. So he's just like, well, if I kill the king, that must prove, and no one comes to challenge me, and I don't think anybody will because I'm the strongest person alive, then that proves that I'm the ruler. So little bit, fortunately, when the king dies, he actually had a contingency plan for his assassination, where if he dies, causes this crazy magic to occur.
The king's magic.
Because of the royal scepter. And it essentially forces democracy upon everyone. He creates this moon in the sky that looks like Majora's Mask's moon. It displays the top 3 candidates. It's like the most popular candidates. So then you have everyone else who says that they want to become a president, or not president,
analogous, right?
Yeah, wants to become the king. They like make themselves known, and then they try to like curry favor of the world and increase your popularity rank, essentially. And the top person at the end of it feels like the king magic didn't have an endpoint, right? It was just like, it was the people that decided to have everything in this.
There was an end date.
There was an end date
Yeah.
for the king?
Mhm.
Okay. So then the king will decided that at the end of the end.
And it was only like
once-
2 or 3 months, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it
Yeah.
was about 3. It was about 3 because I think you play from like August to November-ish.
Or whatever their equivalents are.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I know it's funny. They call it something else, but
Because the days are like Water's Day, Metals Day.
yes. Yeah. So whoever is the number one candidate at the end, once the end date occurs, it becomes the new ruler of Uchronia. And there's also like magic that prevents the other candidates from being assassinated and stuff, which was like pretty
I
interesting.
think it's the top 20
Yeah.
are protected.
It's kind of messed up. It's only the top 20 candidates. Luis uses all of this to his advantage. He uses this anxiety to his advantage, harnesses all of this anxiety that's been created. And one thing, I was purposely trying to avoid the use of the word humans, as you know, because in this game, the humans are this crazy amalgamation of like
grotesque.
Yeah, like body horror looking creatures like that look like real life modern human, but with body parts and different things, sometimes fused with a different animal. The one that always comes to mind is the dude with like the egg belly, but like a human face and then just like human legs and on all fours.
Like the fish guy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the fish guy. It's just legs with a fish head running around. And yeah, so these are results of excess of magla. Yeah. So when anyone, not just an Elden, but any person in Uchronia is exposed to too much magla, they undergo this thing called melancholization, turns them into this violent, exhibit psychotic behaviors, turns them into these humans. And that was also just like an interesting choice to call the main monsters humans, because it's like, oh, this is a result. Humans, you and me, are a result of a bunch of fear and anxiety, and like we might be lash out due to our fears and anxieties and stuff. So
yeah, for sure. Another point of view I could say is like the humans were the monsters. They created this world because of their fear, anxiety, right? War.
Oh yeah, totally. The only reason
it's a metaphor for what we're capable of.
Yes, and that's why it's called Metaphor Refantazio, and that's why that's a good title. Back to the humans. Right. The humans' design is so jarring because it's so far off from everything else we see in this game.
For sure, yeah.
And I love it so much. And I was just, where did they come up with this? Like,
they're a visual treat. Like when you see them, you're like, oh, that's a cool design.
Yeah, and you find the first one, you could even, within the demo, like I think you get the first roughly 10 hours, 7 hours of the game as a demo right now on Steam. So if you haven't played it, you can play it for free. So it is definitely a visual treat. And I think I saw like a Reddit post or something talking about like, oh, this kind of looks like maybe not even kind of, this definitely looks like some of the artwork from this one 15th century Dutch painter, Hieronymus Bosch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that got me into a deep dive. And then I started reading about Bosch and like learning about his artwork and stuff. So you guys have got to check this out. All the creatures are pulled from this one painting called The Garden of Earthly Delights. And this thing is called a triptych. I know you've already seen it already. We've talked about it before. I've probably posed it before. But that means it is split into these 3 parts. Each are detailing kind of a bit of a creation story, but also a bit of a destruction of humanity story. Because like on the leftmost side, you have the Garden of Eden. The middle, you have the Garden of Earthly Delights. And on the right, you have hell. And so like the leftmost side, it's the Garden of Eden. You know, it's taken from a mostly Christianity background. It's supposed to show like the moment God presents Eve to Adam. And you kind of see a lot of this in the Garden of Eden. There are only 2 of like the humans, the actual humans.
Right.
That's Adam and Eve. But there are various other animals in the background. So it kind of shows like this very serene landscape. There's not a lot of quote unquote corruption. But an interesting thing I read about this from art theorists is how this painting was going to be viewed primarily by Europeans. And a lot of the animals that were used in the background were like foreign to Europeans.
I see.
And so they were still meant to invoke this sense of wonder and amazement and just like catching your eye, kind of like what the humans in the metaphor are to us of like, whoa, what is this shit? Like it's just wants to catch you off guard. So in the center panel, which is like the Garden of Earthly Delights, we find many of the human designs that we see now in Metaphor. So these humans are like hanging out with the creatures, sometimes messing with them. There's also a lot of these odd structures in the background that kind of look like a combination of organic matter, of like skin and flesh, but then also stone. It's so trippy. It is kind of like astonishing, like that someone from the 15th century like created this and painted this, because this feels like a modern thing.
I see.
And some scholars also like describe the life forms as behaving overtly and without shame, but describes what's happening in here is just like this shameless playground of corruption where all the humans, both metaphor humans and then actual humans, are just like intermingling and running around and doing whatever they want. In a Christianity standpoint, they're evoking a lot of sin. So the right and final panel depicts this like brutal hellscape. There's a lot of dark colors, a lot of like fire, just like fire, ash, brimstone. It looks so destructive in the background. And you see a lot of the actual humans looking stressed and tortured by the metaphor humans. We see some of them like hunched over in pain, and we see who I think of as like one of the main metaphor human bosses. They call him the tree man, which is the one I was just describing, of that he has like the egg for a body, and then I think he has branches sprouting maybe from his head. I don't have the painting up right now, otherwise I'd be able to better describe it. But we also see he has like a disc around his head, and he's carrying around these demons and potentially actual humans as slaves. And the tree man's like looking backwards towards the audience. So this entire thing, this entire triptych was supposed to depict humanity's quote unquote fall from grace. Like I said, kind of the destruction of humanity. During the time in which this was made, a lot of this stuff you see in the middle painting of just like this playground of corruption, a lot of the sexuality and lust, these were all like sins that they feared would bring the wrath of God and cause the destruction of the humans. And we kind of see this throughout the whole painting that you wouldn't know. I guess at a first glance you wouldn't catch, and I only kind of know about this because I read about it. We see like the sin and lust from Adam's gaze towards Eve in the first panel, and that kind of like sets up like the intro to the sin that you see throughout the rest of it. And, you know, there isn't a lot of that in Metaphor. There's no sin and lust. There's no sexuality and lust, because this is actually one of the only Atlas games that doesn't have a romancing option.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Feels like, yeah. It still felt like pretty apt to how the humans are depicted in the video game. The actual humans of this painting are like subject to all these fears and anxieties, because all this destruction is happening in the painting because of a fear of God, an anxiety that God's going to be seeing you and then come down and smite you and cause all of this and wipe out all the humans. The humans in Metaphor Refantazio are the results of fear and anxiety. And like they become these monsters because of all this fear and anxiety. And then they still go and wipe out everyone else in Uchronia. So the message it felt like they were trying to send was that fear and anxiety causes the destruction of the race.
Right. Yeah.
Which, I mean, who knows if that's true or not, but at least that was like part of their thesis. So I was just stunned by the design. These ungodly horrors, they like terrorize the world. They're bringing up all this anxiety. And Luis knows exactly what he's doing, because we see him throughout the game learn and harness the Magla and create this ability to turn someone into a human and like enforce all this fear and anxiety into someone. We see it with the main character, with Will. He gets turned into a human briefly, and people were thinking about killing him. Some of his own like teammates were like, yeah, if you had gone on any longer, then we might have had to do something to stop you. Like, I think it was only, well, maybe not only, but oh my God, I'm blanking on the Clamar, Stroll. Thank you. Yeah. It was only Stroll who was just like, they were by your side as soon as you woke up. I don't think his devotion to you wavered at all. Even though you're a human, he knew you were going to come back. And that was very powerful, but it is also terrifying to see what Luis is capable of. And even seeing him do that was meant to strike even more fear and anxiety into you, into your crew, to get you to like back off and stop trying to attack him and stop trying to go for that king place. So all this anxiety, all this fear is, thankfully, you're protected from it. And who protects you is also a very interesting aspect of the game. This game talks a lot about fantasy, puts a huge emphasis on like following your fantasies and dreams. And you're essentially kind of doing like whatever you can to keep your fantasy alive. kind of literally, because you are fantasy.
Yeah.
And the fantasy of your friends alive, which is to see the king or the prince restored to health, but then also restored back into the throne and become the actual rightful king. So, you know, you have this whole crew supporting you and you're inspiring other people along your way. And with you being fantasy, that's because you are literally someone's fantasy that is being lived out right now. Spoilers, that prince who is in a coma right now, on the moment of his death, created you to live out his fantasy of traveling the world, but then also in a way of kind of saving the world. Saving him. So the prince's soul, right before he died or went into a coma, was placed into this Magla body that was red, was actually vesseled by the copy of Utopia you carry around. I didn't really realize that until I read about it. And throughout the game, this is kind of why you have no memories. Why, whenever you talk to Grius and Gallica about like the plan to lift the prince's curse, like that's the earliest memory you have because you kind of didn't exist before that. So this was, like I said, like the prince's near-death state, tried to do this last-ditch effort to preserve his body, and through sheer force of will, was able to create create you.
Now I'm wondering if that's the Elden magic at work too. Because the prince is Elden.
Yeah, I think so. Oh yeah, and the prince himself is a mixed. It sounds so messed up. Like,
think of Gohan from Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah.
He's half Saiyan, half human.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You got the prince being half Elden and half what was
Clamar.
It was Clamar? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I do think it was the Elden magic. And you know, because he created you, the prince now essentially had this tangible body to like go out and enact whatever he did, which happened to be the will of the people. So also you stood as an opposition to all the anxieties that Luis was creating. So you kind of exist to help people mitigate their anxieties, get rid of the anxieties, and like keep on working towards your fantasy. We find out though that this book you're carrying is also called Utopia. It is written by someone named Thomas More. We find out later at the end of the game that Thomas More, the author of Utopia, was actually a pen name for your father. And your father had this desire to create this utopia. And that's why he wrote this book. And he wanted to inspire people to envision a world with perfect equality, with no classism, no racism, no prejudice. And you find Thomas More in academia, which is like this.
It's the Velvet Room.
Yeah, it's the Velvet Room and other Persona games. It's like this world between worlds thing where you kind of mentally go to power up some of your skill or your archetypes, which are like the class you've chosen for the time being, and learn new skills and stuff like that. So you often go and interact with him. And like it's very interesting how you don't find out till the end that is actually just your father essentially did this.
It's confirmed at the end.
Yeah.
But I think the game does give you hints throughout, like, hey,
oh yeah,
here's the twist, right? Or here's what we're leading to. It's a foreshadowing for sure.
Totally. So yeah, the King Hathlodius, that's the name of the king, Hathlodius V. No idea where they got that name. I was trying to Google if anyone else was named Hathlodius, any other person. I couldn't really find anything, but maybe somebody would found something out there. And if you did, please let me know. So he apparently tried to make Uchronia more like the Utopia that he painted as, but he failed. And that kind of is what got him on the shit list of the Sanctists. They didn't like this idea of Utopia. They liked having this power. So then I think after like one of his final attempts of creating Utopia, he kind of just gave up. King Hathlodius, he didn't give up, but it almost felt like he was so discouraged, and he just let Sanctifax Forden kind of run over him, and he started just like succumbing to whatever Sanctifax wanted while also trying to build this.
I mean, they killed his family.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
Yeah. I would say
that doesn't discourage you. Wow.
I know. You come to this revelation because you end up at the end of the game, you're like fighting Luis, you're at the brink of death, and then he brings you out of academia. He shows you like this alternate reality of this place that you could live in. He doesn't want you to keep on fighting because he's a little worried that you're going to die, and you are his son, so he wants to protect you. He wants you to stay in this like fantasy forever. So he's like, look at this utopia. This is where you could live. You could exist in this fantasy. You don't have to go back out there into the real world. You could just stay here, live here forever. And it's like Shibuya Crossing. And there's just like a bunch of people. It's like, it's very fun. But of course, Will did not want to stay in fantasy.
He didn't want to team up with Joker?
Yeah.
Persona 5?
I know, that would have been sick. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so Moore is just trying to protect his son at all costs. But then Moore and Will both have this thing inside them called the archetypes. And we already touched on this. Your heritage, you're half Elden, half Clamar. But you're like, okay, this is your father. Who's your mom? Who is this other person? Who is this Elden queen, apparently, that your dad fell in love with? And throughout the game, you don't really hear much of her until like you get to the Elden area and they talk about your mom, but you still are like, I don't know, like they don't really hint at it at all. And then turns out your mom was actually the narrative voice you hear since the beginning of the game, since you unlock the class system called Archetype. And she is like kind of speaking in poetry and like, oh, weary traveler, oh, how thou heart has thus, like just, I don't know, very Shakespearean kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it turns out that that's actually your mom. And she helped you unlock these archetypes within you to give yourself a fighting chance when you're fighting the humans, fighting for your life, fighting Luis. And this comes from the Elden. You're wondering what she is doing, how she is able to exist here. And I think it's because of, once again, the Elden magic. So we see like the majority of magic in the game stems from like anxiety or determination. But here it seems with the queen, her desire to protect the prince was so powerful that it allowed her to continue living, continue existing, if just in spirit, because we don't see a physical body of hers at all. And probably why she like helps you unlock the archetypes. She helps you feel safe. She helps you take your rightful place in the throne. And she wants to just help you in this fight to make your fantasy a reality here. I think the last bit of the game at the very end, in the end credits, and kind of the conclusion to my own talk here, is they kind of like break the fourth wall at the very end. And I know we talked about this in the spoiler cast, but narrated by Thomas More, well, King Hathlodius V. And he's essentially like thanking you for playing the game. He's like thanking you for guiding his son, Will, to do all of these actions that you do, control Will in order to beat and win the game, because that was the true purpose of his royal magic, was to find and seek help from a faraway land. And that's what you, the player, are. So he continues by mentioning that even though this game is like a work of fiction, he hopes the promises of this world echo within us. And that felt kind of touching and moving to me. Like, not only has a video game never like thanked me for playing it in that kind of way, but like
Mario never said thank you.
No, Mario
thank
never
you
turned
for
around,
playing my
like,
game.
Yeah,
you didn't say that.
Yeah. No, I might have missed that one.
Okay,
I think I didn't play 1,000 Year Door, so. Yeah, I mean, they do thank you, but the way that the developers just kind of like impassioned this in their writing, it just felt so thoughtful. It felt so actually thankful. And it was a unique way to say, thank you for playing the game. It really felt like the developers were just like talking to me, saying that they know that this is a video game and everything, but all of the work that they put in here actually meant something very powerful to them. And they hope that that message like comes across to you. So it's me just saying like the ending was this catharsis. Like we needed this release of the emotion because there was a lot going on. And once we finally beat Luis and see those end credits roll, and I struggle to think of a more recent game I played that like had this same profound effect on me and left me with the same satisfaction and like gratitude. And like this game absolutely moved me. And that's why I wanted to keep on chatting about it. That's why it's one of my favorite games of all time. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Don't worry, we'll get the re-release soon. They're cooking the re-release as we speak.
I know. I need some more Gallica interactions. Like,
let's go to rank 20 instead of 10, right?
Christ, yeah. I mean, there was the whole bit at the end of the game where it felt like I had nothing to do for that final like 3 weeks.
I'm sure they would add more to that. Yeah.
Yeah. Either way, I think this game was just a masterclass in like narrative storytelling and adhering to the themes and incorporating themes throughout the whole game, and then making the world feel alive. Just like a brilliant writing, brilliant voice acting. It's like it's hard for me to capture how important the voice acting was and what I was talking about right now. But I think if we had any lesser equipped voice actor, this wouldn't have hit as hard, but everything felt so believable because these people just emoted.
Yeah.
And it felt real. Yeah, it was moving. But we're not done with the TED Talk.
You got mine.
This was intermission. And now we got part 2. I am very curious to see what you got cooking up for us here with your topic. So I'll let you take it away, Joe.
Yeah. So let's talk about villains, victims, and heroes in character theory and affect control theory. So this is an article by Bergstein and Jasper in 2018. So what character theory is essentially helping us understand how individuals and their behaviors are interpreted through specific social roles, how we make sense of the moral and emotional qualities associated with those roles. So it's deeply connected to the way society views actions, emotional responses, and social evaluations. So some roles and social expectations, to get into it. People often categorize others according to roles: hero, villain, victim. These roles are not static. They represent an idealized set of behaviors, traits, and expectations that guide social interactions. Roles are social constructs, meaning they exist because society has collectively agreed upon certain behaviors, expectations, and moral judgments associated with them. So, a villain in our world, we know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Someone that's not a good guy, very selfish, antagonist, negative emotions. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a hero, villain, and all of that.
Yeah.
So character theory discusses that heroes are individuals who are perceived as good, noble, self-sacrificing, and morally upright. Heroes are typically admired and celebrated because their actions align with social norms, and they often make sacrifices for the greater good to protect others. So think of Will, right? Mm-hmm. This is a Metaphor podcast again. The episode, I'd say.
Yeah.
Right? We could be the Metaphor podcast. But,
could be Metapod.
Metapod. But when you think of Will, right, he is the hero, right? He's self-sacrificing, noble, good. He's trying to save the world, right? Trying to save the prince, trying to save everyone, as many people as he can. As for villains, we see them as antagonists in the stories or situations. Their actions typically go against social norms, harm others, create chaos, often morally corrupt, selfish, and serve as the opposite of heroes. Villains provoke negative emotional responses such as fear, disgust, or anger. So Luis, and we'll drop his government name, Luis Guilloburn.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Calling them out.
Yeah, out him, baby.
Yeah, I mean, he starts the game by murdering the king.
Yeah.
And it's treated as like not a big deal. He makes a spectacle of it within like the first couple of hours, right? He's like coming down from the sky, like descending upon his masses. And he's like, yeah, I killed the king. So what? What are you going to do about it?
It is kind of crazy, the statement he makes right from the get-go. And I think that is what made the opening of this game like feel so intriguing and like making me want to learn more, because I was like, what? This fool can't just do this and get away with it.
Right. I thought that was going to be like revealed over time to like the population, right, of Uchronia. But no, it's like, no, he did it. So what?
Yeah. It was powerful. That was a powerful opening statement.
There was nothing anybody can do against Luis.
No.
And so victims are individuals who are harmed, oppressed, or wronged, often through no fault of their own. They elicit sympathy, compassion from others because they are seen as suffering or powerless. Victims may be helpless or oppressed, but can also gain agency when they fight back. So I like that when they fight back, right? Because that's a lot of the supporting cast, right?
Yeah.
They're put into situations where their families are killed, their sons are killed, right? Everything's taken from them. But as they work with Will, build bonds, they start fighting back, right? They find their own reasons to fight back. So they are no longer victims. So them themselves become heroes. So that's that transition.
Yeah, that's very interesting to see that transition. We see it like multiple times throughout this game, and it feels like some video games they'll kind of forcefully do it. It just feels like the way Metaphor handled this, it was just so masterful of like transitioning from that victim to hero, or at least rallying around the hero type of role.
For sure. So what I'm thinking about is Brigida, that social bond link, right?
Yeah.
Who was like the shop owner who was oppressed and she was hated and she was abused, right? And there's a point where she's very angry, where she's like, she wants to get back at people, right? They're after her and she wants to kill them because they take her dog.
Right.
And she's like, she's on a murdering mission.
I know. And she doesn't even want to show the emotion too, is the other thing. She like learned. Yeah, from her.
Because emotion is weakness.
Exactly.
Right? She doesn't want to show that. But you as Will show up, right, and kind of help her through it. You're like that supporting role, that support system that she needs.
Kind of like the therapist to everybody.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. And as she goes on, she atones in a way of like, okay, maybe that anger was misplaced. How can I give back to the community around me? And at first she's a little harsh on Will because he's like, oh, you're just like a fresh-faced nobody.
Yeah.
Right? You don't know. You've never been, abused, been through traumatic experiences. So what do you know? Right? And As you get to learn more about her, she starts to trust you. She sees who you are, right? How like you want to help everyone. You know, you have a good heart, and that starts to rub off on her, right? Because even at the end of the social link, there's like 2 assassins that try to kill her.
Oh,
right. But they're like little kids who the Sanctus Church informed, like, hey, she killed your family.
That was so messed up.
Yeah, it's
oh my God.
This church is messed up.
I know the way they manipulate the people, and everyone just willingly trusts them because I guess they don't really have anyone else to turn to sometimes because there's no king right now. So it's so crazy. And like we didn't even talk about, or I didn't talk about the craziness that happens with the leader of the Sanctus Church getting killed in the middle of the game.
Yeah. I mean, we did talk about it in the spoiler cast.
Sure. Yeah. But anyways, I won't dive into it more now.
But how that social link ends is essentially these 2 assassins, these 2 kids, you know, they're like, we're going to kill you. And she's like, you can do that, or I can give you a choice of like living with me. You know, you can learn some crafts, you know, I'll take care of you. Right. But it's your choice to make. So she gives them agency, which Brigitte from, you know, Bond 1, she was not capable of that. So now she's more capable of more. She's capable of more. She's got more agency. She has a better idea on how to recover, how to heal, how to help others.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's why who comes to mind as a victim is Brigitte. Right. But then she becomes a hero. Right. Because she's giving back. She's trying to do what she can.
Totally. That was a very good point.
Getting into moral evaluation of roles is character theory is deeply connected to moral evaluation. So heroes are viewed positively because they adhere to more moral expectations of doing good, they act for the benefit of others, displaying traits like courage, honor, and selflessness, which are like the royal virtues of the game as well.
Oh, right.
Right?
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, damn. Okay.
I mean, that makes sense. You know, I wish maybe there's a side game where we're Luis, right? And we have, I don't know, unroyal virtues, chaotic virtues, whatever,
chaotic virtues.
That'd be... I know that would never happen.
Loki would love a
That'd be
side game
sick.
playing as Luis, but yeah.
But villains are viewed negatively because their actions are seen morally wrong, often cause harm, act out of greed, malice, or cruelty. I mean, kills the king, turning people into humans, right? Brings a human into Grand Trad just to like lay it down there, and he's like, oh yeah, I killed it, right? Comes back to life, almost like destroys the whole city until you step in.
Crazy. I kind of forgot about that he brought it in, said he killed it, purposely had someone bring it back to life. Like, wouldn't that destroy his own credibility? But
he's always thinking like 10 steps ahead. That's what Luis thinks.
Yeah.
I mean, we beat him at the end, so.
Yeah, it's okay.
You know what? Maybe we were 11 steps ahead.
Yeah, I was about to say, we got 1 step ahead of him, thankfully.
So, victims are often viewed with compassion because they have been wronged in some way and are perceived as innocent or undeserving of their suffering. These roles are not just behaviors, but emotional responses we have to those behaviors. How we feel towards someone plays a significant role in how we categorize them as a hero, villain, or victim. Moving on to emotions and moral judgments is character theory. Moral judgment is intertwined with emotional responses. Our emotions serve as a moral compass that guides how we categorize heroes, villain, or victims. So some positive emotions, right? Admiration, love, gratitude associated with heroes. Fear, anger, disgust. Yeah, that's Luis in a nutshell. Like every time we were interacting with him, I was like, is this it? Is he going to find out what we're trying to do?
Yeah. Like
there was some fear there.
Exactly. It's so funny how the game does such a good job at crafting this fear and anxiety because you are essentially, you work for Luis, who you know is the antagonist, who you know is like the bad guy, but you feel like the only way to get close to him enough to kill him or steal something from him is to work for him and to trick him into believing that you are on his side. So like for, I don't know, maybe a third of the game, or probably more, you're trying to help him out and you meet with him, you discuss stuff with him, and every single interaction you have with him, you're on eggshells. You're like, oh shit, is this going to be when he outs me?
My question is that, did he know all along?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too. He seemed like he might have known the whole time, but he does such a good job at playing it off. Like,
wants to make a spectacle of it.
Yeah. It was like he teetered along the line of knowing what you're trying to do, but then also knowing that you know that he knows. Like, and playing that to his advantage. So he was just a menacing villain throughout the whole game. And I'm so glad the game didn't do the stereotypical thing of like, oh no, actually the church was in charge of everything. Now we got to go kill quote unquote God and stuff. No, it's just this one dude this whole time who was also an Elden, who has also had his whole life taken from him.
Yeah, he did.
But anyways, I might be overstepping my boundaries.
No, you're good. We'll get into it. And let me get into affect control theory, which affect control theory, developed by sociologist David Heiss, focuses on how emotions, affects are linked to people's roles, identities in a social context. Acts suggests that people are motivated to maintain emotional consistency in their interactions. So they act in ways that align with social expectations of roles and behaviors. In simpler terms, we tend to behave in ways that align with the emotional reaction. They're considered appropriate for our role. So like the villain, right? A villain is someone whose actions are harmful, destructive, or selfish, often violating social norms. Villains typically trigger negative emotions, anger, fear, disgust. When someone is labeled as a villain, the emotional reactions toward them align with the expectation. So, affect control theory in action. When a villain behaves in a certain way, harms others, that emotional response is typically negative. So this is going to align with the villain, right? How they act, what they say. And so we'll get into a little bit about Luis. And so I brought some info on, what Luis, like his background, what he looks like. We'll just get into it. So Luis is a young man with long, wavy, light blonde hair, blue eyes, a pair of Clamar horns on his head that are fake. The horns are actually fake.
Yeah.
They are. And are attached by a magical hairband.
Yeah, which, that was questionable.
Yeah, it's like because Clamar's horns grow as they age, right? So like, how did he figure that out? But it's Luis. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt there.
Totally.
He wears a suit of white ornate armor decorated in a Ukrainian state army logo and wears a white cape around his neck. So he kind of looks like Griffith from Berserk. That's what people.
Yeah, I actually haven't seen Berserk, so I'm not.
Okay, I mean you can look him up if you want. Let's see. But I'll keep on yapping.
Yeah.
So Luis is a merocrat, which values rationality, appoints officers based on their capabilities rather than tribe or origin. Basically, if you can prove yourself as strong and above the cut of the rest, you're on his team, right? He wants you. Uncle Sam does.
Yeah, we want you.
Yeah, exactly. He has no prejudice against tribes, and we would recruit half-bloods into his elite ranks as long as they can prove their competence. Even such a person would otherwise be considered an outcast based on tribe and stuff. So he doesn't care. You're strong. Okay, you're with me. He realizes that the only way to unite all tribes, and this is coming from Utopia. He just went down with it a different path. So to unite all the tribes and end racism of the world is through forced evolution, creating a land of equality at the expense of culling those who cannot handle the transformation and retain their sanity. So his plan is to turn everyone into humans, right? Yeah. If you survive that, you have proven yourself that you are strong, a cut above the rest, survival of the fittest. Okay, you can work with me.
Right.
If you don't survive, well, we'll just cut you down.
Yeah.
You're no use to me. So it's also hard for him to find trust in anyone to confide his real plans to, right? Because even Del and Basilio, who are like his right-hand mans, they really didn't know what was going on. Mm-hmm. He painted a picture of equality, that he would take care of them, but they really didn't know what that meant.
Right.
And he never explained to anyone what that means until at the end of the game.
Right. And then he feels like he kind of shows them what his version of equality looks like.
Yeah.
rather than gives them a little PowerPoint before joining.
Which would have been cool. I would have sat there.
I know. Actually, Luis, you're kind of right. Wait a second. No, he's not.
Let's see. So, and in his youth, in Luis's youth, he actually respected the king and was inspired by his ideals when the Clamar visited his village, when the king visited his village. As he dreamed of himself and the Elder leaving the sanctum to roam a new world where his tribe had no need of hiding. So we have to remember that Luis is Elden, right? And he was in, the sanctum, that village. However, such ideals that Luis had perished due to the kingdom's injustice conducted under Forden's leadership, and how, the king failed to believe in Luis's innocence over the prince's assassination, which leads to Luis's radical approach. Basically, there was a lot of bad stuff going on for Luis, right?
Yeah.
He was framed for the prince's murder. I mean, his village was burnt down.
Right.
The church was after him. They were scared of what he was capable of.
Yeah. So it's like he had this fear and anxiety and pressure, and this is what he became when confronted with all of that.
He was pushed to the edge.
Yeah.
Essentially. This is how he dealt with it.
Absolutely.
Right? It's to get back at others, to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else, but the way he goes by it is like violence.
Yeah.
Right?
I thought before finishing the game, I kind of thought that the big twist would be that this is all a story and that Luis is the main character and that no matter what you do, he wins. I was like, I was kind of for that. I was curious to see what kind of story they would tell.
Could have had a Doctor Strange ending, keep on fighting him until we win.
I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, but I don't know if you want to fight him 1,000 times.
Million, yeah. Whatever.
Luis kept the novel Utopia, So he still held some respect for the king, kept his novel, right? Used it as I would say like a diving board or something, like to propel him essentially to approach Utopia in a certain way. right?
Yeah.
Or he's going to use might. Might makes right. Right. And I already went over like what was going on with him, right? So prior to the assassination of the king, I mean, he was like falsely accused of, corrupting the family, the royal family. He was the one that placed the curse on the prince.
Yeah.
But that actually wasn't what was going on, right? This was all, I believe, Sanctifax Forden.
Right. It does seem like it was Sanctifax for. I mean, like he was the initial person to,
because he even he got the help of Rhea, which is like the best healer in the land.
Yeah,
and she made that curse. She was the one that formulated it.
That's right. I see now, because you play throughout the game thinking Luis was the one who cursed the prince, but then it's revealed that it was actually somebody else.
Yeah, I'm not trying to redeem Luis.
Yeah,
right.
Okay,
he's still a bad guy, right?
Yeah.
But you can see as like trauma, right? He dealt with it a certain way. This is his villain arc. This is how he became the villain, right? And to some, he isn't the villain. You think about like some of the people that are helping him. They think he's right. They think he's the hero.
Yeah, they do see his like power and his might and like all of the kind of military just prowess and think that that's the way forward and believe in him because of that.
Yeah, for sure. And so using control theory, affect theory, let's connect it. So we can utilize the theory to explore the character's villain arc. We follow that. And I wish we got more because we only hear like bits and pieces of it, right? We don't see what exactly happened to Luis, like, because there's no side game for him or anything like
right.
that.
Very true.
So he's a survivor from the previous attack on the Elden Village. From a young age, he's subjected to the horrors of the Sanctus Church. So like imagine being a child who survived this, right? He faced tragedy and decided to take the path that he sees now. Yeah. He's a gifted soldier, tactician, magician, using his skills and gifts to find success in the military. And I would say probably makes the military like stronger. His assets improve the military, right? And what they're capable of before, he decides to do a coup, essentially.
Yeah.
He's like, nah, I'm gonna do this my own way.
Right. That is kind of crazy how he like works his way up to get as close as possible to the king, assassinates him, and you were essentially trying to do the same thing with him. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. And he may have seen it coming or not.
Right.
I feel like he did.
Yeah, I actually, after just saying that right now, it was like, oh, he did the same thing. He probably could recognize when that is happening. He probably saw it coming and was still using that to his advantage because he's this master strategist who can think 10 steps ahead.
Right, because he wasn't battle crazy. He wasn't like one of those characters that's like, oh, I need a strong opponent.
He wasn't like Blue in the original Pokemon games as well.
Or for the Bleach fans, Kenpachi and Ichigo, right? He wasn't bloodthirsty in that way. What he wanted to do, he's on the warpath, he's on his villain arc, but to him, he believes he's doing it correctly, and he's doing what he can to reach that goal. So us as the players can understand that he is the villain. He begins the game by murdering the king. Will's papa, if you will. Luis makes the murder a spectacle as the game begins. With control theory, the audience can feel the anger, fear, and revulsion. For example, there are multiple times in the game where we avoid being detected as an enemy because we stand no chance against Luis. Right? That's that fear. I know I talked about it in the spoiler cast. It's when we basically infiltrate his gauntlet runner, Luis's gauntlet runner.
Right.
And you have to do it under certain time restraints. You can't get caught. And there's just like some anxiety there because it's like, I don't want to get caught. I don't want Will and the party to get caught.
Right. Yeah. That was a fantastic part of the game.
Oh, yeah. And I remember feeling overwhelmed at that point because the game was like, okay, go figure it out. Right. Here are some tips, like you can buy from like merchants, the informants of the town, and you deal with it. Right? You figure it out. And it's like, oh, this is too much. I don't want to deal with that.
All right, wait a second. Yeah.
And again, each time we interact with Luis, we know he's the villain. There are no redeeming qualities to him. He is callous. He doesn't care about anyone else, right? He talks to Stroll. Stroll like walks up to him during one of the scenes and was like, oh yeah, I didn't care for that village. Like whatever.
Yeah. He was like, I don't care that your family was like the king and queen there. Like it didn't matter. It was nothing personal against you. I just hated everything there.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, yeah, this dude's not redeemable. Even Yufo, one of our party members, doesn't understand why we want to kill him. She meets him and then understands.
Yeah.
So he's not redeemable. Right. And then talking about like his certain form at the end of the game, certain fallen angel.
The fallen angel.
Right. There's no redeeming him. So this is his villain arc. He starts as, just a kid, right? And then he becomes Lucifer.
Right. So, damn. So we are killing God. Well, we're killing the devil this time, but at least
Atlas loves doing that.
Yeah, they sure do. I kind of wish Luis didn't turn into an angel or like that fallen angel at the end. I really would have loved just to fight him as him and not be some sort of human form, but it makes a lot of sense.
I get that, but his regular form was never really that tough.
Right.
Like his form, because I didn't struggle against any of the fights until he turned into that, like, you know, Lucifer form, fallen angel form. But then that was on me because I was playing with the merchant class. I didn't want to switch to the prince.
Oh my God, bro.
Because I was like, I'm going to hit you with money, bro. Because I had so much money. And I was like, I'm going to use this class.
Yeah, definitely should have used the
yeah, it would have made it
king
easier.
At that point, at the very end, I think. Or no. That wasn't
the prince.
It was still prince. Yeah, it was still prince.
So the ACT theory informs us that people are motivated to maintain emotional consistency in their interactions. So after playing the game, Luis definitely applies to this theory because, he's just a villain the whole time.
He was consistent. Yeah. And there wasn't even like nothing too crazy of a reveal or twist. I mean, we learn of his like Elden background, but that felt like it made sense. Yeah, I felt like his background didn't really matter at that point anyways. It did amplify like and make kind of make some other narrative plot points a bit more clear. The fact that he was Elden, that he was also persecuted and like drove him to the edge and this is his result. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't any sort of twist in like an ally actually being the major villain in control of everything. Like there wasn't any stereotypical twist, I felt like, in this game.
There wasn't there wasn't any omnipotent force that was controlling.
Right. They send a message about that by killing the church and killing the leader of the church and like having the church just sit out afterwards. It feels like once Sanctifax Forden is killed, you get this like cutscene of all the people in the church and like, shit, I thought we were the ones in charge here. Like, what do we do now? We have no idea. And like, then you can see them kind of scramble and whatnot. And they kind of have a plan, but there's no steady leadership anymore. There's no one for the church to rally around. So it's like, okay, the religion's out of this. It is truly just Luis. There is no other omnipotent force. There's no other higher being that's controlling this. It is just Luis.
Yeah. This is the Luis show.
Yeah.
Right? We're trying to take him down.
God, what a character. What a villain. What a soundtrack.
Yeah, for sure.
We talked about that in the spoiler cast, but yeah. Man, thank you for applying the
affect control
theory. Into this. Like, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it just goes to show how much depth there is to a lot of what Atlas built in this game. Because I feel like even though you and I just, this might be a little over an hour by the time I edit it, but I still feel like there are things that we could keep on deep diving on that we haven't even touched on. But this we each did a lot of work already on what we talked about. So it's okay. It's okay. But me just saying this meant that there's a lot of depth to this game. And I think it's because of this brilliantly crafted world. And yeah, this game deserves all the props that it got and like the GOTY Awards and everything. And I feel like I would hope that it is remembered fondly as like one of the best going forward.
I would say that this game, you know how people think fondly of Final Fantasy VII on PlayStation
Absolutely.
1? Yeah, I believe that for me, this is that game. Yeah. This is my Final Fantasy VII.
I would say so too. I mean, like I think I was old enough to play FF7, but I didn't have it. So I don't have that nostalgia for it, or I don't remember it quite the same way. And like, I never played the original. I've just been playing the remakes. Yeah, this game is certainly impacting me in the way that a lot of people talk about FF7 would say.
For sure.
Well, y'all, I think that's going to do it for us here at Mind Controllers. Honestly, I went a little longer than I had thought, so sorry about that, Joe. Yeah, cut into your time there. But thank you all once again so much for listening. If you haven't already done so, just go ahead and rate and review us on whatever podcast listening app you're using. And if you're not following us on socials, go ahead and hit us up there on Instagram, Twitter, Blue Sky, Twitch, YouTube, TikTok again. We're on them all. So I would love to see y'all there. And if you have the financial means to do so, go ahead and subscribe to our Patreon. I mean, we're currently a listener-supported podcast, and we have a $1 tier that will grant you access to the Discord to come hang out with us. And then I'll go ahead and send you some stickers as a thank you for signing up. All right, guys. Thank you again for listening, and we're going to catch you on the next one.
Yeah. See you in the next one.
Take care, everybody.